Yeah, so welcome everyone to Intro to APIs, hosted by Ryan Awad. So the workshop will be an informative workshop, and hackers new to programming and hackathons will be able to get an understanding of APIs and how they might be used in a working project. This workshop will help inspire hackers into their project idea and encourage them to delve into many useful aspects of APIs. And the live demo will also aid in increasing hacker confidence and better understand the application of APIs. So Ryan, take it away.
All right, so hi everyone. Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me? Is the audio working fine?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. So welcome guys to the workshop. Thanks for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about Intro to APIs. So before we start, since it's May the 4th, I'd like to wish everyone happy Star Wars Day. So yeah. All right, so this is going to be the schedule for the workshop. First, I will introduce myself. Then I'll talk about what is an API, why APIs are used. I'm also going to talk about where APIs are used and how APIs actually work in detail. Also, I'm going to talk about some popular APIs that are used frequently nowadays, and the best part, the live demo. Okay, so a little about me. My name is Ryan Awad. I'm a bilingual student, currently in grade 11. I've been programming for 4 years now, and I love it. I've attended several hackathons, and let me tell you, it's a great way to learn new skills and meet like-minded hackers. So last thing you should know about me is that I'm a massive astronomy nerd. Okay, so now from my experience with APIs. I've worked with APIs for about 3 years now, and I've learned a lot along the way. I found myself incorporating APIs in some of my projects, such as my smart mirror. So my smart mirror is a digital custom-built mirror that displays the date, time, weather, the location, altitude, velocity of the International Space Station, and a custom-built calendar. So this uses a lot of APIs. This used the Google Speech Recognition API, the MSN Weather API, and the Where the ISS at API. As well, I made a interstellar bot, which is a Discord bot that returns live space data. So this project used APIs like the Discord API, of course, many APIs from the NASA Open APIs, which is a hub for all of NASA's open source APIs, a few APIs from Open Notify, which are just APIs centered around space-related data. Both of these projects will be on my GitHub, which is kind of plugged at the end of the presentation if you guys are interested. All right, with that being said, let me explain exactly what is an API. Okay, so what is an API exactly? Well, an API, or application programming interface, is like the middleman that allows two applications to talk to each other. But what does this all mean? Well, before I explain that, let's look at an analogy to make things simpler. All right, so say you're shopping for new running shoes and you go into a shoe store, but you don't know exactly which shoes you want to purchase. You then ask an employee to help you choose a pair of shoes. He then asks you for some basic information like your shoe size, the type of shoes you're looking for, and maybe the preferred color. You give him all the information he asked for, and he goes into an aisle and picks out several shoes that fit your exact specifications. He then brings those various shoes back to you to choose and try on. So an API works just the same. So in more detail, an API is the messenger that takes requests and tells the system what you want to do. Sorry, and then returns a response back to you. So let's talk about a real world example where APIs are utilized. Well, let's say that you're using a website that finds you prices of hotels in a selected area using information from various travel booking companies. So the website asks you to input values such as the place you are visiting, your check-in and checkout date, and the type of room that suits your needs. The way the site gets all its information is by interacting with the various travel booking companies' APIs, sending a request to all those APIs using the inputted values to return information. That information is then displayed on the site for the user, or you in this example, to view. So APIs are really unsung heroes of today's connectivity between devices. Okay, so before we move on, I just want to talk about the types of APIs. So there are two main types of APIs, both different in their own unique ways. So first up, we have the REST API, or Representational State Transfer APIs, which are now kind of becoming the future as it's gaining a lot of traction. This type of API generally returns data in a JSON format, although REST APIs do also return sometimes their data in an XML format, but the JSON format is much more common. This tends to make the use of REST APIs very clean and simple. This is why it's loved by developers and being used more and more. Now, onto the SOAP APIs, or Simple Object Access Protocol. So this type of API is actually quite old and is drastically decreasing in popularity. SOAP APIs return their data in an XML format. Now, if you've never heard of XML, it's similar to HTML in terms of syntax, but unlike HTML, it's essentially used to structure data for storage and transport. So out of the two, REST APIs are just overall better and gaining a lot more popularity. You will find yourself frequently using REST APIs. So I kind of made some, I guess, example outputs here of, I guess, a JSON response and an XML response. So yeah, visuals. Okay, so what are the advantages to using APIs? Well, the first advantage would be its automation capabilities. APIs are great tools for automation. Let's say you wanted to automate sending birthday wishes to specific people over email. You could use the Gmail API, for example, to write code using the API to email a happy birthday message to specific people with their corresponding birthday dates. The next advantage to using APIs is the efficiency that APIs deliver. So when you have access to an API, the data is published automatically. This means that APIs allow data to be distributed very easily. And last but not least, integration is another big advantage. APIs guarantee very fluid information delivery, which makes it much easier to embed data into a website or application. This allows for a more integrated user experience. Okay, now, where exactly are APIs used? So they can be found in several places nowadays, countless places, but I'm just going to list some of the more common places that they're being found nowadays. So the first thing is just generally in various applications. Now, this is pretty general, which is good. It doesn't really put a limit on where APIs could be used. This could mean mobile, computer, web apps, several really types of apps. They're also heavily found in streaming services. So for example, Twitch, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, Twitch uses a lot of APIs, and as a matter of fact, has one of their own. It's open source if any of you guys want to go check it out. APIs are extremely common to be found in social medias too. Social medias use an endless amount of APIs in their system. For example, social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Reddit, Snapchat, and many more have their own APIs, as well as use several external APIs. Now, for the next one, this might not be as commonly known, but it's a growing concept. APIs can now be found in vehicles. So this is something that Tesla Motors has been working with for years. They use an API to send software updates to all Tesla cars. So it's pretty cool. And I do believe that there is an open source API that someone created in Ruby that works for all 4 Tesla car models, but you'd obviously need Tesla to try this out. So it's undoubtedly kind of an expensive project. APIs can also be found in financial institutions. So many financial institutions like RBC, BMO, and many other have their own APIs, which they take advantage of when developing their own apps, such as online banking, mobile, and web apps. They also utilize several other APIs in their systems. All right. Now, onto how APIs work. So let's break this down into several parts. So first, there are making requests, methods, endpoints and path parameters, headers and bodies, authorization, and response codes. Now, first thing, let's answer the question, what are requests? Well, requests are the key component of using APIs. Requests are our way of requesting or asking an API to perform a specific action. Those actions can range from getting us data to updating something in a system or site, and many more. We call that a method, but we will get into that shortly, so don't worry about that right now. Once a request is made, it will return data. It will return what we call a response code. And again, we will get into that soon, so don't worry about it right now. Okay, so you're probably asking yourself, great, how do I make a request to an API? Well, there are a few things required to make requests. First, you're going to need a method, an endpoint and path, and depending on the API, parameters, headers and bodies, and authorization. But what does this all mean? Okay, well, let's start talking about methods. All right, so what exactly is a method? Well, methods are our way or method of telling the API what action we want it to perform. There are four main methods for asking an API to perform specific actions, which we call HTTP methods. So we have get, post, delete, and put. So let's talk a bit about each method. So the get method, which simply tells the API that you want it to read data. So it's very commonly used as reading data can be extremely useful. For example, let's say that you wanted to make an app that displays regular blogs, popular blogs for specific sites. You would have the API ask, you would have to ask the API to go and get all the popular blogs on a specific site. Hence, you would want it to read data for you, which means that the method you should use is the get method. But for the post method, this asks the API to create and send data. So moreover, let's say you wanted to add functionality to your app, which would allow you to post blogs on a specific site. To accomplish that, you would have to send a specific type of request to an API, which would ask it to create data, which in this case would be your blog. This type of request would be a post request, as it tells the API that you want to create and send data to post a blog. Now, for the delete method, this will, just like the name, ask the API to delete or remove specific data. Like, for example, let's say that you wanted to add another piece of functionality to your app, which would be the ability to delete blogs that you created on a specific site. You would need to send a delete request to an API since you want to delete a blog which is represented as data. And finally, for the put request, this will simply update or replace specific data. So in more detail, let's say that you wanted to add one more piece of functionality to your app and you wanted your app to be able to make changes to your blogs. Well, to achieve this, the type of request you would need to make when sending a request to an API would be the put request, for the reason that put requests will ask an API to update or replace data, which in this case is your blog's content. Essentially, the API would replace / update your blog with a new selected version that you wrote in your request. Okay, so now that we covered methods, what are endpoints and paths? Well, it's quite simple, really. An endpoint is like the general point of communication that the API uses. So in other words, this is where your request will be sent and taken in. For example, if you're sending a request to this URL on the screen right now, your request will be sent to youtube.com as highlighted in red. Now, a path is different. A path is a location where your request is performed. So if I were to send a request to this URL, my request will execute on /feed/explore, which is highlighted in green. Okay, so now let's talk about parameters. So parameters are just ways of giving information to an API. Essentially, they're very much like arguments in a function, if some of you are familiar with this. Let's give an example to make this maybe easier to understand. I'm going to use the example that I mentioned a while ago about a website that finds you the prices of hotels in a selected area using information from various travel booking companies. So when sending a request to several travel booking companies' APIs, you are most likely going to need parameters. A good amount of these parameters will contain information that the user inputs into the site, like the place you were visiting, your check-in and checkout date, and the type of room. So parameters will allow the API to hold on to these values when doing its work before returning back with a response. So in this example, we see here on the screen, there is a parameter called search_query, and its value, which it holds, is hello. So as highlighted in green, you can see that. All right, but the example I showed you is not the only kind of parameter that exists. There are actually several types of parameters, such as the query string parameter. So this parameter was the same type of parameter seen in the example on the previous and current slide. To indicate that you are starting a single or series of query string parameters, you use the question mark symbol, and everything in front of that are query string parameters. So in this example, you can see that we started off by using the question mark symbol as highlighted in green, if anyone can see my cursor. And we followed it by the parameters and their according values as highlighted in red. So you can see store_id equals 7 and section equals tools. So also notice how I highlighted the ampersand here in blue. So the ampersand here is used to actually split each parameter. So you're splitting store ID and sections. So the next type of parameter is the path parameters. So this type of parameter is found within the path. And you can see this, you can see an example in the example how each parameter is in the path. So for example, we have /name John /role mechanic. So you would just essentially put the parameters in the path, essentially. The last type of parameter is the header parameters. So header parameters are found in the request header, which are usually used for authorization. Now I'm going to talk about headers and authorization very soon, so don't worry about that right now. Okay, well, there you go. Let's talk about headers and bodies. So headers are kind of extra data that you would add in your request outside the URL. So not all APIs require headers, but there are a good amount of APIs that do require you to send some form of authorization through the request header. And again, I'll talk about authorization shortly. Now the body is usually used with the post, put, and delete methods. This is where you would put information that is sent in the request to those specific methods. So for the body, it's normally written in a JSON format. You could use a body on, let's say, a GET request, but that would really have no meaning. In other words, it won't really change anything. Adding a body to your API request depends on the method that you're using in your request. Okay, so let's talk about authorization, right? So now keep in mind that not all APIs require some form of authorization. Usually the bigger, more popular APIs do require some form of authorization somewhere. So authorization is very important as it keeps things secure when working with APIs. APIs can sometimes relay sensitive data, so having some form of authorization can be extremely essential to keeping the API and the data secure. Another important reason for authorization is the use of identification. For some specific APIs, having some form of identification is pretty vital to their functionality. This could be for many different reasons, ranging from basic security to applying limits when using their API, which we usually call rate limits. Now, authorization comes in many forms. Generally, there are two main types of forms for this: API keys and request tokens, and also OAuth, which is usually found in, I guess, frequently in Google APIs. But there are many more forms of authorization depending on the API, of course. Okay, so how do you use authorization? Now, it's quite simple. In general, as I mentioned earlier, authorization is frequently used in the request header. So the second way would be to use the authorization in query string parameters. Here are some examples of authorization using the header request and a string query parameter. So you can see that this is the header. I don't know if anyone can see my cursor, but what's highlighted in red is authorization : and then an API key. And over here, you can see that there's the parameter API underscore key, and that equals an API key. So you can see that both highlighted in red. Keep in mind to never share any type of token or API key with anyone, as this could pose some security risks. Most big APIs will allow you to regenerate a brand new token or API key when needed for whatever reason. Okay, so the last thing on the list is response codes. Now, response codes are seen in responses which APIs deliver back to you. Now, they are used in APIs to they're used they are used by APIs to give you an idea of what happened to your request. So, for example, the code 200 OK means that everything went perfectly fine. Your request was processed and sent with no problem. On the other hand, the 404 not found response code, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, signifies that your request was sent to an invalid path. It's just simple as that. For the code 400 bad request, just like the name, your request was not properly formed. This could mean several things, like, for example, you did not include something specifically needed in your header, or there is a missing parameter. There are many specific reasons for why you got this response. It really just depends on the specific API. Another common response code is 403 forbidden. This simply happens when the path which you are trying to send the request to is forbidden for access. This could also sometimes mean that you do not have the proper form of authorization in your request, so you might have missed, or you might have put an invalid API key or token, or it really depends on the API. There are so many more types of response codes. I'm just going over some of the common ones. If you ever get a response code that you don't recognize, which is very possible, a simple Google search could tell you the meaning of the response code. Okay, so now that you know the basics of APIs, here are some great popular APIs that can contribute something great to your next project or startup. So first, we have Google APIs. So Google APIs is a collection of the 24 amazing APIs which Google owns. A few examples would be Google Maps API, Google Voice Recognition API, Google Cloud Vision API. There are way too many to count. You guys should definitely check them out. They're very cool. Now, next we have the Spotify API. So for the Spotify API, I believe that it is required to have a Spotify premium account to interact with our API, which might be a bummer to some. But nonetheless, your project could definitely get very interesting when integrating Spotify within it. All right, so IBM APIs. So the IBM APIs are very sophisticated and are great additions to most projects. IBM APIs offer really easy ways to implement artificial intelligence within your projects. They have several APIs for different types of tasks that usually utilize artificial intelligence, from like speech recognition to image detection, facial detection, and they have a lot of, I guess, machine learning, artificial intelligence related type of APIs. Now, for the Twitter and Facebook API, these APIs are great for many things. Generally, they are great additions to your projects, and they have a lot to offer. being very general here because they truly have a lot to offer and it's kind of hard to be precise here. So yeah, check them out. Next, we have the NASA APIs. So NASA APIs are great for many types of projects. It's great for research projects, as many of their APIs are used to access astronomical data in their databases. So for example, there were some APIs for, I think, meteorites, and you could find like their mass and everything. They have a lot of different databases. So if you're doing like a research project and you need an API, NASA APIs are a great go-to. It's also great for, just space-related projects if you're kind of like a space nerd like me. Now, finally, we have Rapid API. So I kind of want to emphasize the usefulness of Rapid API. Rapid API is the largest API marketplace with over 500,000 developers and 8,000 APIs. So they have so many different types of APIs that can be used as the core theme of your project or simply an added piece of functionality. Rapid API has various categories of APIs such as business, education, entertainment, finance, gaming, machine learning, medical, science, text analysis, visual recognition, weather, and numerous more. I've listed a little too much there, but all right. Now, for the best part, the live demo. So I should be sharing not just the Chrome window. So if I go out here, okay, go out here. I wrote some code. So this will all be on the GitHub, on my GitHub, which is shown at the end of the presentation if you want to refer to it. So I use the Blogger. If I can get this little taskbar kind of in the way here. Okay, I can kind of make my way. So I made this blog on Blogger, just a demo blog to kind of showcase the Blogger API, which is owned by Google. So it's one of the Google APIs. It's a really good API. It pretty much allows you to, I guess, interact or do pretty much anything you'd be able to do on Blogger just using code by sending requests. So I made a few files here to kind of demonstrate some of the points I talked about. So first we have retrieve blogs. Sorry. So it's really simple code. Pretty much this is, in this type of code, you'd have to use a GET request. So we will be sending a GET request to a specific URL. So the URL showcases many different types of parameters. So this URL over here, you can see that we have to put the blog ID in the path. So that's a path parameter. And then here we have to put the API key in a query string parameter. That's called key. So yeah, that's kind of just demonstrating the different types of parameters. So I made an if statement here to say if the code is not 200, to print something went wrong with a request. So it'll be printing the entire response in the response code, and then I'll be extracting some values from the response and kind of just printing them in like a list. Obviously, this could be used on a website and several different things. It's just a quick demonstration. So I'm just gonna run the retrieve blog.py. So first you have to input the actual ID of your blog. That's something that the API needs, and it's how it kind of identifies the blogs. So I'm on my account right now, and I made this blog. So the ID is usually stored as another, I guess, path parameter right over here. So you'd have to copy this in the URL. This is how you get the ID of your blog on Blogger. So I'm going to just paste that here, and we're going to click enter, and you can see that we got a response. So first, let's just break this down. We got response code 200, which means that everything went perfectly fine, and the request was properly formed. Everything ran perfectly. So this is the response. So you can see that this is a REST API, as this is a JSON response. So you can see many different keys in the JSON, like kind, the ID, the name. So this is the actual like name of the blog, the description, published date, the date where it was last updated, and many more. So I kind of just extracted the values as most of you probably know how to do. Just put the blog name, description, number of posts. So I'm going to actually talk about retrieving posts. So we currently have 3 posts, publication date and time of latest update. So yeah, so speaking about the posts, we do have 3 posts. I made some little dummy posts here. So I made a second script here that also uses a GET request. Oh, I don't think I made this clear, sorry. For retrieving the blog, you would have to obviously use a GET request since we're just simply reading data. We're reading data about the blog that we're trying to, I guess, get information on. So in this case, it was the TOHacks demo blog I made. So this was sent using a GET request. Okay, so I'm just going to clear the console. Okay, so now onto the retrieving the posts. So that's another example of a GET request. Obviously, we're just trying to retrieve data. We're not deleting, overwriting, or editing data at all. So over here, we have this new URL. Now, all this information of generally how the API on itself actually works is, I mean, there's a lot to it. I'm just covering kind of some basic pieces of functionality of the API just to, I guess, demonstrate some basic things I put in the workshop. But there's a lot more to it. You can definitely check it out and use it in your project. It's a great API. Exactly why I'm using these specific URLs, it's stated in the documentation, so you could just find that on Google. It's pretty intuitive. So over here we have /blogs and then another path parameter. So we put the blog ID, of course, and then /posts. And then obviously the query string parameter API key. So I don't think I mentioned this. Obviously, the API key here is used as a form of authentication or authorization. It's a query string parameter. So I guess it just demonstrates that. They do also use OAuth, which is a specific, it works in a specific way, and you have to, I guess the way it works is a little bit, you'd have to go and read the documentation, but in generally it would send a header with a specific token that Google would give you. But for this, you just need the API key. So we're using a GET request, putting the API key in a query string parameter, path parameter with the blog ID, and we're going to send the GET request. Same code. We're just going to be extracting different values, of course, because we're not just looking at blogs, we're looking at posts. So I'm going to run this. Retrieve posts. Okay. So first you need to put the ID. I copied it, and there you go. So a lot of stuff to uncover here. Okay, so yes, the responses do usually get very big. So that's why obviously you filter it. So response code 200.
Ryan?
Yep.
So someone just asked if you could increase the font size a little.
On the terminal?
Yeah, I think
Sure.
it's hard to see. And then there was another question. So in retrieve -blog.py, if you entered a blog post that does not exist, what status code would you get?
Yeah, that's something I actually forgot to cover. So thanks for reminding me. Okay, I'm going to make this a little bigger. So, okay, let's actually look at blog.py. So is this big enough? I'll just make it extra big here. Okay, so let's put the ID of the blog, or actually, no, I'm sorry, an ID that doesn't exist. So we'll just put something random. Let's just hope that it doesn't exist. Okay, so there you go. We got a 404 response code, which means that it was not found, and it's just an invalid path. And that's obviously because that ID is non-existent in their system. So there is no blog that holds this ID. So you simply got a 404 response code, which again means that it was not found as seen in the message here. And there's obviously just an error because, well, I attempted to extract values which don't exist in this request. So now actually I want to maybe show something else. If we were to get rid of the API key and we were not to give the proper form of authentication, and we were to actually, yeah, and we were to just look at a valid blog, but not give the proper form of authentication, we would get a 403 code, and you'd see that 403 meant forbidden. And you can see the message here that they actually returned saying that your request is missing a valid API key and reason forbidden. So status permission denied, you get the point. So yeah, so this is why, you have to make sure to definitely use the proper form of authentication, or else you're not going to get a good response. So yeah. Okay, so now for posts, retrieve posts. Okay, so we're gonna we'll just go back to the valid blog. If you were to put an invalid ID, you pretty much get the same with the API key. You get the 403 or 404 if the ID is invalid. So for the response code, we got 200, everything ran perfectly. We got a very big response. You can kind of make out some values that make sense here, like my love for corgis, which was one of the blogs over here. And you can see values like published, updated. So in items, this is an array. It's pretty much a list, and the list holds, I guess, 3 different objects, an object for each blog. So it's pretty big and hard to read, and you're not really expected to read all this JSON. Just kind of try to pinpoint down specific values and kind of learn how it was structured so you can extract them properly. So I kind of extracted them in a kind of cleanly here. So post 1, the title was my love for corgis. Now the content, you can see that it looks really weird. This is HTML, as some of you are probably familiar with. So yeah, there is HTML formatting on these posts, as you can have like headers, and there's different fonts and I guess different types of styling and
Ryan?
Yep.
Hey, sorry, another question. Can we attach API of other people's blog as resources within our project, like in a website or web app?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't understand.
Yeah, can we attach the API of other people's blog as resources within our project, like in a website or web app?
You mean like use the API to get information on other people's blogs?
Potentially, the person didn't give clarification. If the person who provided this question can give a clarification, Ryan can give you a better answer.
Oh no, okay.
It's open on the Q&A, Ryan. So if the person is able to provide clarification, then you can answer it there.
Okay. Would the code look very different from another language? The code look very different from other languages like Java or JavaScript, or is it a similar concept? So this code is in Python. You could definitely use APIs in all types of languages. Really, you could even use it in your terminal or in your web browser. Well, only for GET requests. You can't. Your web browser actually just sends GET requests when you go on URLs. But I'm obviously using code because if you're doing an app, you're gonna have to use code. I don't really think there's another way, but you could definitely use Java, JavaScript, C++, C#, pretty much any language, as long as it has some type of package or some type of way to send requests. So, maybe not like very ancient languages, but will this be recorded and uploaded later for viewing? Yes, I do believe this will be uploaded to YouTube. So, or to Google Drive, I'm not sure. I am asking for APIs I'm asking that for APIs has to be my account to record. So it depends. So if you want to just read the posts, if you want to use GET requests, so you want to read the posts or read the blog information, you can, I believe you can do this with any blog, because this is obviously open information and open access for everyone, because you just go on the site, right? The blogs are supposed to be published publicly. Now, I don't know if there's a way to make the blog private. I haven't looked too much into Blogger, but if there is, I would assume you wouldn't be able to. But if the blog is public to be viewed on your web browser to anyone, I'm sure you could send a GET request to get certain information. Now, we're going to be looking at how to create a post, delete a post, and update a post. So these use the post, get, and put requests. put, post, and delete requests. Sorry. And for that, you obviously need authentication, or you have to be obviously it's going to use something called OAuth, which actually verifies your identity using your Google account, which I'm going to show very soon. So this just makes sure that you're actually the owner of the blog, because you can't obviously go, deleting people's blogs or editing them. That would kind of be a breach. So, but yes, definitely, if you're trying to get information with a GET request, you could definitely do that as long as it's public.
Another question. Did you need to install anything other than stock Python in order to run the example Python code you just presented?
So there is actually some packages I used here. It's in the request. Okay, there's a lot of packages. So the thing is, I only installed like 2, but they all have dependencies that kind of come with it, and they were all thrown in there. But really, just there's a package for Google Authentication using OAuth and requests to send requests. So this will be obviously included in the repo. So if you want to try the code, you could, pip install -r requirements.txt, and it'll install everything inside there. Now, in terms of actual like software that I've installed to do this, just Python really. My IDE is, VS Code, but that doesn't really affect anything. It's just a text editor. So yeah, that's really all that's been installed in this process. How do you bridge this API Python to HTML or JS, CSS? Why in Python? I just chose Python because I personally like Python. I think it's very short, and it looks clean. So I just kind of thought it'd be good for everyone to see. Now, if you wanted to use this with JavaScript, you definitely could. JavaScript does have the ability to send requests. So you could definitely use JavaScript to send requests and then assign certain values to variables, and you could, I guess, print them on different elements. I've never personally done it that way. I have used APIs for, I guess, web, and that was for the Smart Mirror because the GUI is using HTML, but I used Node.js, which kind of works a little different, but you could definitely do that. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Another question, sorry, was how to bridge this API from Python to HTML or JavaScript, CSS. Why in Python? I don't know if you answered that already.
Yeah, I just did. I mean, I could maybe recap if she didn't, that person didn't hear. So I just use Python because I think it's very clean, and it's easier for people to read. But you could definitely use JavaScript as long as you could send a request using code and get a response. You could pretty much do anything with it. So JavaScript definitely is a modern language. You could definitely send requests with JavaScript. No problem. Okay. So is there any other questions before I move on?
No. So an API would be connected to a database like SQL?
So I've never actually made an API, but I would assume that, well, definitely some are connected to databases, SQL databases for sure. Yeah, essentially they would be connected to some type of database. Some APIs actually do things for you, so they don't actually just let you. They're not all APIs let you work with data. Some APIs actually do some work for you and kind of filter or do stuff with the data that you send and gives it back to you. If that's not, I don't know if that's precise enough. Maybe I can give some examples. Like there's a lot of APIs that you can use if you want to incorporate AI. So obviously you'd send specific data to it, and it would use a process depending on what you're trying to do and send you a response back. So maybe like labeling images and things like that. So, but yes, for the Blogger API, I do believe that it's definitely connected to some type of database. Okay. Any more questions? Where does GraphQL fall into the API world? I'm actually not very sure. I'm not familiar with GraphQL. I've heard of it, but I'm not very familiar. Sorry if I couldn't answer that question. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions before I continue? Okay, so where are we? Okay, so yeah, so I guess you get the point. Each post was printed individually, so it was post 1, and then my love for corgis, publication date, and post 2, Star Wars Day, publication date, same thing for all the blogs. So, or for all the posts. Oh, another question. Oh, so so yeah, so pretty much you get all the information for each post on that blog. Now, something I'd like to point out is the number of comments, which is 1 here. So this actually does look at the number of comments. So for example, here on Star Wars Day, I kind of wrote like a dummy comment here to just kind of demonstrate this. So you can see that there's 1 comment here and 0 on the other, which is shown by the API. So I don't know if there is something that lets you access comments, probably, but I haven't looked into it too deep. Okay, so let's look at creating a post. So I'm actually just show the code before I run this. Okay, so yeah, the code's definitely a little longer, but not too long. So okay, so I used a package that, okay, so pretty much I'm just gonna briefly explain OAuth. Oh, there's a question. Some APIs can be designed to connect with MySQL databases. Some applications I've written in Node.js can be designed to use a Mongoose library to connect with MongoDB database, or MySQL APIs to connect with a local MySQL DB for CRUD operations. Okay, sounds interesting. Okay, so all right. Anyway, so so this is the use of a post request, because we're actually creating a new post, right? So we're sending data to be, I guess, posted or created. So OAuth, just a brief explanation. OAuth is just a way of, so OAuth is, pretty much generates a specific URL you go onto by Google, and it pretty much lets you select a Google account, and then you could take that, select that account and give it permissions to have, I guess, give Blogger permission to have access to your blog. So you're probably familiar with this when signing in with your Google account to different websites. So you could generate this from scratch using code. It's just easier with the Google OAuth library. Python. Another question. Sorry, I was answering. Oh, okay. So first, we're gonna have to input the blog ID, also the post title, and the post content. So the content that we want to put in our created post. This is a code for creating OAuth. So it uses like some JSON file that I called credentials. You can check this out on the documentation. It's all kind of neatly written out for you, and I'm not really going to go into that, but you could check it on the documentation. It's pretty intuitive. So pretty much you run the server. This server is just going to create kind of a local server that it opens in your browser, where you can authenticate your Google account so that the API can actually have access to editing your or creating posts, because it needs a little bit more than just an API key. So so the URL. So pretty much it's the same URL that we did for retrieving the posts. You still have to include your API key, but in this case, we're going to be sending also a body. So the header was sent. It's just kind of a little bit implicit here, because Google OAuth does it for you. But pretty much Google OAuth, I guess this over here would create a header for authentication with OAuth once you would authenticate. So it's a little bit like, I guess I understand how maybe that doesn't show the use of headers too much, but that's kind of because Google kind of does it for you. But you have to send a body, so that's where you put the actual contents of your blog. So you have your blog, and then you have to put the ID. So not so sure why they need the ID, but I mean, if they need it, they need it. So the blog ID that you input, which you obviously need because you have to choose the blog which you're sending the new post to, you just put it in here. The title is the post title that you've put, and the post content. And you can also write HTML code in this. Oh, question. So the blog ID is not dynamically created while creating a post. The blog ID is created when you create a blog. When you create a blog, you don't have posts yet. Each post has its own ID, actually. We're going to look at that when deleting posts and updating posts that already exist. So each post has their own ID. But yeah, when you create a blog, you get your blog ID, and then you can start creating posts and whatnot. Okay, I hope that answered the question. So what we do is we send a post request, and the data would be the body. So we'd send the post request using the body, and the header would, I guess, be sent before we sent the post request, I guess, to authenticate using the OAuth. Okay, so now we would get the response code, and then I'll print I guess, the response and whatnot. So I'll just try it. Post, it's waiting. Okay, so we have to input the blog ID. So put that in. We'll choose a post title. A post title. We'll just call it I don't know, hello world. And then post content. HTML is supported. I'm just not going to do it because I think it'll look a bit ugly in a single line. So I'll just say this is a test blog or post. And we're going to send this. So, okay, a lot of things happened. Okay, so first you go through the OAuth window. So the code creates this window for you that opens in your browser, and this is used to authenticate through OAuth. So you need to actually select your account and allow it to manage your Blogger account so that you can actually make new posts or delete posts. So this OAuth thing goes for creating new posts, deleting posts, and updating posts. And if you're just retrieving data, you just need an API key. That's it. So we're going to click allow and allow. And good. Successfully authenticated using OAuth. I cannot really see the tab because something's in the way. That's okay. So now we can look at the console, and you can see that we got a response code 200. So now the response is actually the same response you would get when retrieving posts. It's literally just the JSON, I guess, contents of the post that you created. That's not really useful for us because there's no reason to print what we just wrote, but it might be useful for other people. So before I go into the blog, I'm just gonna hear overtime. Okay? I should probably speed this up then. Okay, so we're just gonna look over here, and you're gonna see that there was a new post created. Yikes. And then now we're going to look at deleting posts. So for deleting posts, it's the exact same code, but you just have to pretty much send a delete request. So we're going to just do delete post.py. We're going to just put the blog ID, and we're going to put the post ID. So post IDs, you get them by clicking on not here. You'd go in here where you would edit your posts, and then you click on a post, and over here, I don't know if it shows because of the little banner here, but you get the post ID right next to the blog ID. So you'd put that in here, and you'd obviously go through OAuth. So you'd authenticate, and then successfully authenticated. Now, the response was 204. Now, this actually doesn't mean anything bad happened. This is simply the response code for there's no response to send back. And that doesn't really mean anything bad. That just means that everything went well, but we just don't have anything to respond back with. So you get a 204, which is totally acceptable. So if we were to look back here, you can see that the post is now gone. We were to go back here and we were to refresh, the post is now gone. Now, let me just update a post that we currently have. Update post. So pretty much same code, but you need to actually give in the post ID that you want to update, and then the title and the content. So, and then you would send a put request. So we're just gonna, it was update posts. Okay. So now you'd give the blog, oh, that's the blog ID, this, and then the post ID, that's actually non-existent. 1 second, we'll choose my love for corgis. So we're gonna take it, put that ID in, that's the ID we want of the post we want to change. And you give a post title, we'll just say hello and post content world, for example. And you go through the OAuth like usual. Don't read out loud, conclude here. Okay, so and you can see that we got a response code 200 and the post was edited just before I go off. And there you go, the post was edited. So that's the end of the workshop. I'm just gonna quickly, I guess, just edit here. This is my my LinkedIn, my GitHub, dev post, and email. So feel free to reach out if needed, or drop me a connection on LinkedIn. So yeah, thanks for attending the workshop, guys. I really appreciate it.